Has to be talked about.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan Rohr, and I'm delirious from doing the night ministry last night. I'm in San Francisco at Grace Lutheran, where we have a Christmas Eve service tonight at 9:30 p.m. We're calling it our Celtic Christmas Eve with carols, because that's a lot of C's, and it's fun to say. Mostly it means you get to sing some of your favorite hymns, and there'll be a pretty harp and a guitar. Yeah, John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, John Stevens, pastor of Zion Lutheran in Oregon City, Oregon, and we also are worshiping this evening at Christmas
What?
Eve. I know, it's crazy. I think I'll go to church tonight. Special music at 6:30 to 7, and then 7 we have our early service with candlelight, choir, caroling, and communion. Aha, another C. And then a late service at 11 p.m. So, and that has candlelight and communion. All right,
Yeah. We also have candlelight and communion. That's
great.
an amazing theme of people doing things. And we'll sing Silent Night. Ooh, chills when you
No,
sing Silent Night.
everything. Um,
Um,
Candlelight goes
that's
up.
right.
Awesome.
So three things that I want to tell you before we get lost in this text, where the preview to look forward to is we'll be talking about Christmas today and the first Sunday of Christmas, which is Holy Innocents. And we won't rationalize why the first Sunday after Christmas is about babies dying and being martyrs of God, but we'll talk about it. So hold on to that. First thing I want to tell you is that the book Bible Stories came out today on ebook and Kindle on Amazon, and I'll put a link down here. It's fictionalized stories that flesh out little-known Bible stories that you didn't know about, that put the story in a contemporary theme or show us a broader diversity that isn't as easy to find in the Bible to make you feel like you're more welcome and a part of the text. It's a fun read. There's a couple of different Christmas stories in it. So if you're looking for alternate Christmas stories or just something to keep you from having an excuse to talk to your family, read the book and then be in good relationship with your family. Second thing is tomorrow, which is Christmas Day, December 25th, my partner Laurel and I are heading to China for the second half of our Seven Wonders of the World trip, and we'll be stopping at countries along the way for a week and a half on our way to London, visiting all of the wonders of the world and many of God's wonders of the world. And during our trip, we will be posting some videos at different sites that we visit and putting some information about how you can look for God in places that you go around the world. So just stay tuned for that. I'll post it here on justlutheran.blogspot.com if you're interested, or you can join me on Facebook, Reverend Megan Rohr, if you want to see pictures or follow that trip. The third thing is really cool. I haven't even told this to John yet. But because Grace Lutheran does a live stream each Sunday at 10:30 a.m. when we do our worship service, and because I travel a lot and have the opportunity to meet some of the people who participate in our live stream and share communion with them, and we have people who donate to our congregation who also watch the live stream, the three things that are required for becoming a member of a Lutheran church is participating in worship at least once a year, giving money at least once during the year, and taking communion at least once in the year. And we have received permission from our bishop, and who checked it out with all the legal powers to be at ELCA National Headquarters, that if you are one of the regular watchers of our Grace Lutheran live stream, you are eligible for membership, with the live stream being your worship attendance for the year. Now that would mean that you'd want to email me and check in with me about making sure that you can receive communion, that I can visit you when I'm nearby, and we're gonna come up with a way to show like the perfect attendance card for live stream. Maybe it'll be like pretend questions afterwards that prove that you watched the worship. I don't know what it will look like. I don't think we can do that as Lutherans, but I just wanted to let you know, if you're someone who's interested in virtual membership of Grace Lutheran, that's something that is possible now, and you can just send me an email at pastor@gracesf.com if that's something you're interested in. And if you're another pastor and you're interested in something like this, you can say, Pastor Megan's bishop got permission from the ELCA headquarters to do this. Can we look into how it might be possible at our worship space? know that in order to live stream our worship, it takes about $1,000 of licensing in order to make sure that your copyright materials for your normal worship service are able to be streamed online and archived. So email me if you want to learn more about that for your congregation. Go team. Okay, so that's the goofy plug portion of the day. Now on to Christmas. Right. The Bible study that you might not know if this is your first time watching us is that, so there's 4 books of the Bible that talk about the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're called the Gospels. There's others that talk about what the disciples were up to afterwards, and some letters that Paul wrote with unsolicited advice about how the churches could work in the world, and some other texts about how we live into the future of what it means to be a Christian after Jesus has the life, death, resurrection, float up into the sky, ascension bit. So the four texts that talk about the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, only 2 of these texts talk about the birth of Jesus. Mark's gospel starts when Jesus is baptized, and John's gospel is poetry and way too cool to talk about facts and details like that. And so it kind of skips over the whole thing. So when Matthew tells the story of Jesus' birth and how Jesus is in the world, Matthew is establishing this story as credible, as a part of the Jewish history, and is doing what was acceptable for people who are writing biographies at the time, and he plagiarizes all of the facts from the story of Moses. This is something that happens other times in the Bible. There are some people who think that the information that we have about King David in the Hebrew Testament or the Torah, in the part that is the first section of the book, they think that maybe the biography that is assigned to David in the Bible is actually what really happened in Saul's life. But they were trying to show that David was better than Saul, so they had to kind of take all of those details and ascribe them. We don't know if that's really true, but we do know that when people write their celebrity memoirs, there's controversy when people argue about whether or not the facts are right? And if you've ever sat around a Christmas table or a dinner table or a Thanksgiving table with members of your family, and you've told stories and had a member of the family say, "That's not how that happened. I specifically remember blah, 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 blah," you know that people remember things differently all the time. And so it would make sense if these stories were remembered differently, if they were told differently, particularly if they had different aims, like follow my set of rules. No, follow my set of rules. So they were crafted and written for certain audiences. So Matthew's gospel is yay, this is a part of the tradition you know and love. Jesus is a lot like Moses. And Moses, when he was fleeing Exodus, there is a plague that tries to kill all of the firstborn sons, and the Israelites save themselves by this plague by putting blood on the door frames, and that's called the Passover, and it's a very important celebration in Jewish ritual and culture, and also in some Christian ritual and culture. And this story then gets mimicked in Matthew's gospel, where the powers that be want to kill all the firstborn sons and all of the sons during a certain time period to get this one rascally baby, right? And that's kind of where Holy Innocents comes from. We'll talk more about that later. Luke's gospel, on the other hand, is very strange in the way that it was written when it comes to how people wrote back then. If you remember, it was a very patriarchal time, very male-centric time. The men were probably the only ones able to write the text, but Luke's gospel is written from the perspective of what's going on for the women. And all of the men end up getting silenced somehow because they screw up, or because they're not able to be as prolific and as profound as the women telling their stories. If you find yourself in a Christmas service that's following the lectionary text or the signed readings that follow a 3-year cycle, you'll probably hear a reading today or tomorrow from Luke's gospel. And then sometimes pastors will choose to read a reading from John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and blah, 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 blah. That's in part because they don't want to do the Nativity sermon twice, 2 days in a row, right? And also because we think in John's Gospel, because he was such a poetic dude, he talks about the beginning of Jesus being the beginning of everything, that Jesus is a part of this larger God creation story. And you can talk about the whole world and during the Christmas time. So that's some of the perspectives about how the Christmas Bible stories are laid out. But you'll also find the story told in a million different ways. If you've watched the Hallmark Channel at all in the last 2 months, you know that there's a million ways to have Christmas movies and to tell Christmas stories. Some pastors are going to do children's books. Some pastors are going to dress up as members of the Nativity. Some pastors are going to follow what Martin Luther did. Martin Luther shocked his congregation when on Christmas he appeared without his robes. Without his robes, not in an emperor's new clothes kind of way where he was naked, but just in his regular everyday clothes and without all the pomp and circumstance, because he believed that this was the day when God became human and was ordinary like us, so the pastor on that day could be ordinary and be their fullest humanness, and so he didn't wear his robes that day. Scandal, the scandal. So that's a couple of the different ways that the story unfolds. I'm going to pause here so that John has a second to get a word in edgewise. Otherwise, I'll just preach for an hour. I know.
Well, I mean, you touched on the Holy Innocents, and that we'll get to that. That's yeah, it is. Though it is amazing that there is so many ways that we can access this story, which it just tells me this kind of a universal sense that there's something in this story that speaks to all of us, and there's all the different ways you're going to see it. I just keep coming back to this. I mean, Luther talks about Scripture being the manger that holds Christ, and I love that image of that when we look at this night, the night of, it moves it beyond just the written word. There's a feeling that there's a sense of coming alive. And I don't know. We do this as pastors. We do this stuff every single week, and so to have those times where it's like, those holy festival days are, they're good things. They're a good day, and so I keep coming back. Lacuna has a book called I think it's God for Us, and about it's Trinity. It's a book on Trinitarian theology. I think Ted Peters had us read it at seminary. So I could completely have slaughtered the author and the title, but that's all right. But God for Us. I mean, the whole nativity scene. It's a reminder that our God says yes to us. And I saw a great graphic on Facebook. We're getting really serious when I bring in Facebook. That's the serious stuff. But great graphic. I think David Hansen shared this on the Facebook ELCA Clergy Facebook page. A photo of the TARDIS. And it was like basically the manger is the TARDIS of old, because it's a small, tiny little manger. So much fits in it. You have a visitor in the back. Yeah.
Oh, hey. Hold on one second. I'm gonna pause myself, and I'm gonna let you keep talking, John.
All right, great. So this idea that the manger, that there's just so much, or it's like, you go in Aladdin, this God and this tiny little baby, but God in the flesh. Anyway, so that's what I've got, and so as you come to a Christmas Eve service tonight, you're gonna have a lot of different experiences, and like Megan said, there'll be some of us that tell a story. Anyway, there we are, and it's not. Yeah, thanks, Megan. She paused herself, and that's good. So, Holy Innocents. since we're moving on to that at some point, Megan talking about how Matthew ties in the story, looks back into Moses, looks back into the Exodus and all that, and this idea that the Holy Innocents is when Jesus and Mary and Joseph, they go to Egypt, and Herod being ticked off, trying to, he's scared, and a lot of times when we're scared, we I don't want to say overreact, but here's Herod, who, yeah,
Sorry, everybody. I'm back from the Bible study. Not sure what happened to John, or where he left off. So sorry about that confusion. The thing that is helpful to know about Christmas, back at that, is that Christmas is the time when we not only celebrate the birth of God in the world and the risk that God has taken as a human and to be vulnerable, but also to think about the entire life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, where the fact that this whole attempt by God to make justice happen in the world is going to happen. And that's part of what the celebration is about. It's about the anticipation, particularly that's voiced by Mary, that says that justice is finally going to come. And so if you're someone who has looked around your world and seen that there is injustice in the world, then you get to celebrate in that hope and that longing and that expectation from God that justice is once again going to come again. And so that's I think what we are putting into this night. We're also thinking about twinkly lights and rituals and traditions that mark the rhythms of our lives. There are many people who only come to church on Christmas or only find themselves in a church for that kind of conversation, or on those kinds of days, or only bring their kids, or only go with their parents. And for some people, maybe for the modern church, these days like Christmas and Thanksgiving are the times when it might be the only time that you get to see someone. And some pastors wonder if they should preach the entire year's worth of sermons during that time, or if they should broaden what they are up to and just try to be present in that space. Some other pastors are thinking about the fact that they might only have one really good day of evangelism where they can make everyone into members. Some people are thinking about their end of the year budgets and if they can get the final amounts of money that they need from people. But I think as a pastor and as a Lutheran, and as the ability to stay focused on what the day is about, which is Jesus and God being born in the world, is really the most important part. It's not about the fanciest smells and bells that you can come up with to try to get people really excited about what's going on in your congregation. It's not about making sure that people stay forever or that you get your end of the year check. It's about centering people in a moral compass. It's about proclaiming forgiveness to people who might never hear it for the rest of the year. And it's about being present into this holy mystery that is what God is up to stir up justice and to push us ever towards God. And I think there's something magical about that. Even if I'm cynical sometimes, and when I hear the Christmas hymns playing in the mall, I think, ugh, really? There is something about being in a congregation and singing some of the songs that wells up in me emotions that maybe I wouldn't have expected. And so it's an interesting time of the year. And so I invite you to go and see what happens. Maybe it will feel magical, and maybe it will feel like Christmas is for younger people who believe in the magic still. But I think there is something important about having a touch base with what's going on with God, and if you find that in the twinkly lights and in the Christmas ornaments, there's a link down here about church Christmas ornaments and learning more about them. Then all more the better. My encouragement as a pastor would be for you to not put yourself in a place where you need this to give you goosebump feelings, or to be in a place where it's going to replicate all of the memories that you've had in your life, but to put your place in a place of, again, reorienting yourself to where God is calling you to be in the world. And not so much in the sense of taking on a New Year's resolution, because that's what Christians do in Lent rather than in this season of Christmas. One of the things that I think might be interesting, and I was writing a little bit about this week, is the idea that if Mary views the birth of Jesus as a call for justice in the world, she's essentially saying, I'm not the one who needs the New Year's resolution, it's God who needs the New Year's resolution. And she is making a list of things in her acceptance of what is about to happen to her that is a New Year's resolution for God. And it's a list of the justice that she wants to have done. And so if during this time you create a New Year's resolution for God, or you make a list of the things that you want to pray for, and commit to the day, because committing to a year's hard, then I think that's a very wonderful thing. And so use this time to see where you're headed, to prayer and an encouragement for where you think God ought to be paying a little more attention to justice in the world, and as a way to maybe try out and see if church can work for you again in ways that it hasn't worked in the past. Some fun things about Christmas Bible study. Are you interested in some Christmas Bible fun facts? One of the historical fun facts is that in the Christmas story, the versions that we have in Matthew and the versions that we have in Luke, if you look at the details about who the political leaders are and about where they're traveling, and one of them says that there's a census that they're trying to take part of, then the stories take place about 3 years apart. If you think about the fact that they may or may not have recorded birth dates, they probably didn't have Social Security cards back then. They had a census that they took as a way of finding out when people are born. But if you think about 150 years of passing down a story about how someone was born before you wrote it down, or before we have a copy of it written down that lasted and could be read and preserved by people, then you might be fuzzy on some of the details. So maybe it was in 3 AD that Jesus was born, given the historical context and the leaders that they're talking about in the text, or maybe it was in 6 AD, maybe there was a census. It's also possible that some of the details are put in when people say Jesus couldn't have been the Messiah because it says in Isaiah that the Messiah will be born this way, or because it says in this other text that Bethlehem is where the person will be born, in the city of David. And so it's possible that some of the details are put in after the fact in order to show that this is indeed the one that Scripture's foretold. But it's also equally possible, given the stubborn will of Mary in Luke's telling of the story, that Mary, through her determinedness, through her desire to really make sure that the world was going to be changed by this baby, checked off of the list all of the things that Scripture told her needed to happen. If you know any strong mama bears in your life who do everything that it takes to get their kid into just that school that they're interested in getting their kid into, you can imagine Mary this way if you'd like. It's just a counter narrative to those who wonder if what Mary is up to is to be this passive person who's just bearing a baby in the world. So, John, I'm just talking about how I think it's really fun to hear the story of Luke and to read it as not as necessarily a story where the writers 150 years later are like, well, in this text it says the Messiah will be born this way, so I'm pretty sure they did that too. But to imagine, that's possible that it happened that way, but I like to imagine Mary as less passive than that. I like to imagine Mary as someone who knew the Scriptures really well, and like a mama bear who was determined to get her kid into the right school, and she was determined to holding God to account and saying, God, you are going to do justice, and these are the list of the kinds of justice you're going to do. And if you forget that you promised to me that this child was going to be the one to bring it, I'm going to drag my ass to Bethlehem on a donkey, and I'm going to check off from the list everything you have to do to be the mama of the Messiah in the world, because I'm birthing this. So I'm just enjoying that kind of reading of the text today. Welcome back, by the way.
Well,
we're both squirrely pastors who get drawn in all sorts of directions.
Secretary's gone, and as your guy came in, and then it's like I'm sitting there, and I've got a window right here that I can see people come in, and,
yeah.
and it was like kind of like,
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I had someone who wanted to use the Yellow Pages, which I don't think we've had Yellow Pages here in maybe a decade.
All right.
I don't know why he stopped at the church to look at Yellow Pages, but that's okay. But we're back, and it's fun, and Jesus, yay, Christmas.
Yeah. Yay, Christmas.
But my encouragement is for people to not think about the way this story is told and think, well, if I don't believe in a virgin birth, then God doesn't exist at all. Because that was a method of storytelling. When you were going to tell a story where the person was going to be the main hero at the end, during this historical time period, everybody's biography started with a miraculous virgin birth. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Again, I think Mary would check everything off the list in order to make this Messiah happen, right? But if you don't believe that there was a miraculous virgin birth, you can say, well, in history, this is just the way they wrote stories. Or you can just read the Gospel of Mark instead, where there's no virgin birth. Or read the Gospel of John, where there's no virgin birth. And so I want to... This idea that you can debunk the Bible, which is a book of metaphors and hope and promises and guidance about how we can stumble through this world, not even with dignity. I don't think many of the Bible characters stumble through the world with dignity, but how you can stumble through the world and always be looking towards God or relating with God, even when you screw up everything imaginable. I think that's really more what the book is about. And this idea that God's working really hard to be in relationship with us, even when we're not working really hard to be in relationship with God, that for me is not something that can be debunked like one of those ghost television shows where they go in and try to prove how you can shake the lights and set up the video camera. Anyone who's trying to use science to debunk a feeling and a sense of connection is goofy. I always laugh. There's all of these scientific tests that have been coming out recently, about how the number of words you speak to your kids will determine how affluent they become in the future. And there's all these tests about what's the right way to have a baby. And I've talked about this a little bit. Parents nowadays read 1,700 books to try to figure out how to have a baby the right way. And there's a different theory every other year about how to do it. You hold the baby a lot, you hold the baby a little. You let the baby sleep, you let the baby sleep with you. You get a Moses crit, right? And sometimes it's connected to what people are trying to sell us, and sometimes it's based on these scientific studies that are trying to prove, why do some kids love their mama more than other kids? And it's probably one part personality, one part luck, one part how much mom has to work, right? But if you look at these stories as a recipe for how to have the perfect family, it might be easier to sleep at night as a parent, but then when it doesn't work, it labels you as the failure, right? And the scientific studies that are talking about like the number of words that you speak to your children leads to their affluence ignores completely the fact that people who don't have to work as much because they're affluent have more time to say more words to their kids, and their affluence can be passed down to kids who might become more affluent. Like, it completely ignores the amount of money that they have. And so I'm not saying all science is horrible and you should throw it out. I'm just saying you get to learn lessons from your life, even if they're not provable anywhere, right? If you've ever been in a relationship where you deeply loved someone and everyone thought you were nuts and you still think it was a good idea to love that person, you get it. You get why proving things isn't always the right thing to do. Sometimes in retrospect, we decide whether or not something was real or true or actual love by how the ending goes. And so I think you'll find Christmas, like Easter, is shaped by the ending or the not ending in this story, right? So the life, death, resurrection of Jesus, you might find in some of those Christmas hymns. Very few congregations have the guts when they're singing What Child Is This to sing all the verses. But my favorite of the verses is, nails, nails shall pierce him through, the sword he bare, or the cross he bare for me and you. Because it's sung in a lullaby tune. And it's hysterical. Because if you're a Christian, you sing the song and you're like, la la, yeah, down on the cross, blah blah blah, right? Because we don't associate the cross with terror. We associate it with our pride of being Christians, and the bigger the one you wear, the more important you are in the church, right? Bishops. And so just know that you might find some cross language on Christmas. I actually have decided, normally at Grace, there's this big pebble mosaic in the back of the sanctuary, and it's a lovely story because people gathered all these pebbles from the beach for a really long time, and then they sorted them by color, and they worked with this artist. And it's Jesus on the cross in the back, and it's in black and white. But it's not just Jesus on the cross, it's dead Jesus on the cross, right? There's different variations of Jesus on the cross depending upon where you are and what kind of church you're in. Some of them are like alive Jesus on the cross, and you can see him with his chest puffed out, and he's got like a ray of light coming down because he's feeling no pain while he's on the cross, and he's happy and clappy, and he even has like a smile on one side of his face and a grimace on the other. In other places, Jesus is super bloody. If you ever go to a Latin American church or a South American church or some Catholic churches, there's like blood everywhere, real hair, really lifelike, lots of blood, right? And that's kind of thinking about the ways that Jesus suffered, and to remind us to take good and make good use of our life and confession, because this bloody, bloody Jesus means that we have to remember that sacrifice all the time. Our Jesus made of pebbles is sunken down Jesus. He's dead Jesus. He's hanging from the nails. He's not puffed out. He's not bleeding anymore. He's deader than dead Jesus out of these black pebbles. And at first it kind of bugged me because I worried that people would come in the sanctuary and hear all of the things that they were told about how they need to turn or burn, or that they were just going to think only of this dead Jesus and not remember the alive Jesus that's out and working in the world. We've done some things to put other colored icons, like Jesus in color looking alive, around it, and it has fleshed it out a little bit that I actually think it's really beautiful now as one part of the story. But when it was just the only story on the wall, it kind of creeped me out a little bit. And so I think this year I might leave it up during Christmas. Normally they color it with a pretty star so you're not seeing it on that day, and I think there's something, I don't think you can erase the fluffy, happy donkeys and shepherds and wise men and manger story, which is actually terrifying if you read it in the Gospel of Mark, because the like, and we're going to kill him, let's get him, that is happening throughout this narrative of Matthew. But I think there's something really beautiful about this process of God being willing to be with us, to suffer in the worst ways they could have imagined back then. We've now, human ingenuity, unfortunately, has come up with better and more torturous ways to torture people, which we're learning about, right? But I just think that there's something really beautiful about allowing Jesus to be in the fullness of what's going on for people, so that the person who has an experience of learning what it's like, right? What if we thought of, this is going to be really weird, because this is just, everything I say is weird, but what's The Fault in Our Stars? Did anyone watch The Fault in Our Stars? And the whole point of this, it's like a teeny bopper movie about how amazing love can be when someone chooses to love you even though you're going to die in a horrific way. And isn't that just the most beautiful love story, when someone chooses to love you anyway? And when you're cynical like me, that's kind of what this Jesus story is about, right?
That's exactly what this Jesus story is about.
Right? It's The Fault in Our Stars, except instead of teenagers, it's, I guess Mary's maybe a teenager at this time. Okay, never mind. It's exactly Fault in Our Stars, minus the oxygen tanks, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the flip side is that it's our story of faith. That
right.
We're loved despite all of our weirdness and stumbling, or not in spite of, because of our weirdness and stumbling. You know, you're talking about the tying back to the cross. That verse is so fantastic, and in the what child is this, and you know, and for those who for the first time they hear that verse, it's kind of like, whoa, that's disturbing, and it is disturbing, but it's also because, and we can sing it in a lullaby because we know the end of the story, at least our faith, right. The end of the story. Which back into the I don't know what part when you're earlier on when you're talking that spurred this on, but
I don't even know.
You know, we are talking about debunking our faith.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately what ends up happening is how to put it, this book, which is the Bible, this book, it's so apart from what it means to be American, and I'm saying that in the sense that most of our sense of about America, I just want to say that a couple of times, America, is that it's all about me. You know, it's like, and I do the same. I do this a very similar. Oh yeah, Jesus for president. Yep. Yeah, Shane Claiborne, good stuff. So, that when we I want to see how it's all about me. I do a similar thing. I walk into a church and I look and I'm like, okay, so how am I going to be fed? It's about me. Rather than about us. And I think you're talking about whether you can believe in the virgin birth or not. And I love, and I think Nadia Bolz-Weber said this in one of her blog posts, which spoke to me for a while, is that when you come to church as a community, not everybody is going to believe the same thing, or you're going to have someone over here that fully believes in the virgin birth. You're going to have someone over here that doesn't believe in the virgin birth. You're going to have someone who believes that Christ was fully God. You're going to have someone who is still struggling with that. But as we come together as community, we can say things like the Apostles' Creed, which for those who don't know is a statement of faith that was written a long time ago, long time ago, and we mess around with it, but it's a creed. It's a statement of, okay, these are what we believe. And I love the fact that as a community, we can say that, but as an individual, I'd read this and I go, man, I am I don't know if I can say this, but I'm sitting next to my, I'm sitting next to, I don't know, my, I was gonna say Grandma Myrtle, but I don't have a Grandma Myrtle. But someone in
That's a
the
good name for a grandma, though.
yeah could be my grandmother,
Uh-huh.
and has a different is in a different spot in their faith. I don't know. No, I do know. It's the idea of that personal relationship. I balk against that because it's communal. It's all. I mean, if left to my own devices, it's not a good thing. you know, Ooh, danger, we're watching. Anyway.
That's right. Well, and I love to in the Book of Lutheran Confessions, geeky pastor time, which if you don't know anything about the Book of Lutheran Confessions and you think I'm going to say something like really horrible and bad, know that the Book of Lutheran Confessions is like 400 pages long, and it says you don't have to confess, right? So in the Book of Lutheran Confessions, it talks about when you are praying the Apostles' Creeds, do you have to believe it? Do you have to believe every word, or are you in big trouble if you don't believe every word? And it talks about this idea that you can borrow the faith of your ancestors. And the idea is, if you don't believe every word, you can say the words as a part of this sanctorum communio, is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer calls it, as a part of the community of the saints. And you can be borrowing the faith of other people who believe it. It's what happens when teenagers go to church and they read the parts in the bulletin. They are borrowing the faith of their parents and reading the creeds because their parents said that they have to. And then in college, when their brain is in a psychological place where they can make decisions about what faith they will be or how they will have faith, then they can make those decisions for themselves. But you can borrow this faith. And so when we do communion at Grace, I talk a lot about how we are the echo of the people from the earliest Christians who are sinking their breath together by repeating these words, and who are using we're essentially bringing this idea of faith from these ancestors. And we don't have to believe every word because we can borrow the fact that they believed it, and we say the words more to connect us to people who are worshiping in other spaces than to make sure we have the right answers. At least Lutherans can say that that's true. There are other people who say the words because they are instructing people exactly what they need to believe every word of. And I think the lovely thing about sharing those words together is to have things that can connect you. And they're doing a lot of stuff on NPR lately about people in Alzheimer's units. When you pray some of those prayers that they repeated every Sunday culturally, they perk up and are able to be present in a different way. Or if you find the song that really works for them, they're able to be present in a way that they might not have been. And you can find this sometimes if you've unfortunately been to a lot of funerals. People's connection to Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, or to songs like Amazing Grace that they've sung at really intense moments in their life. Even if they didn't believe every word of Amazing Grace, they don't believe that God saves a wretch like them, or that they're a wretch even, the song and the singing of it can bring you to an emotional place that gets you out of your head and makes you stop wordsmithing and fact-checking and debunking, which you might do during the sermon and through the prayers and through everything else if you're really grumpy about what's going on. And as a pastor, I have to say that I do that too, because it would be like if you've ever gone to a new dentist and they have like a commentary about the work that the previous dentist has done. Like, we're all kind of judgy of how other people have done their stuff, and so pastors sometimes have running commentaries, except for the really good ones who are good at meditating and
so I
brains.
Had an amazing experience this last week. Our youth group, our confirmation, which is 7th and 8th graders, we went caroling, and one of the places we went caroling was McGoughlin Memory Care, which is an Alzheimer's unit, or just specifically for that. And we were there, and one of our kids was moved, was blown away that as we were singing one of the carols, one of the folks that was sitting next to us in his wheelchair and kind of was in their own world was started to sing along with us. And so as we were leaving, she said, I thought that they had problems with their memory, and it was a great conversation about what connects us, which then is springboard to another comment. When you talk about the confessions, the Lutheran confessions, and about borrowing the faith of our ancestors, for those who aren't Lutheran, or for those who are saying connect it to the Bible,
I love that you're thumping the Bible. That's our first Bible thumping at Bible study that doesn't suck.
That's funny.
I want to get a Bible so I can thump it.
That's like so not me, but anyway. I'm playing a part. As Jimmy Pardue would say, it's a character. It's a character. Anyway, so but yes, I'm back. Oh yeah, my kids were playing with mine, so it's somewhere else in the office. I don't know. Here, I'll just pull out my frog. Hello. Anyway, there's my frog. Anyway, or my Holy Spirit. This is my Holy Spirit balancing.
Oh,
yeah.
I like that one.
It's cool. Anyway, so
it's way too embarrassing to get most of the toys that I have in my office because congregants have specially ordered them to look like me.
Oh.
I'll go get my they had someone who makes nativities make a shepherd out of wool that looks like me.
Oh yeah.
You keep talking. I'm gonna go get it.
So, but about the Bible, so the confessions tell us about this faith that we borrow. Hebrews tells us about this cloud of witnesses. So if you're like, oh, very nice, yes, and creepy. No, just kidding. No, it's very nice. I like it. But I was just saying about cloud of witnesses. That in Hebrews, where the sense of that we have these saints that are in our midst, and so borrowing the faith of the saints, of the witnesses, and I like that it's that. Hello, hey, if you kiss me, I'll turn into a prince.
I'm not allowed. It's a violation of the ethics policy of the Lutheran Church to kiss people while I'm in my collar.
Oh.
It's made of wool.
Kiss people while I'm in my collar.
Yeah, you're not allowed.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Too many people have gotten in trouble in the papers.
Oh. All right. So anyway.
Look at my hair. It's awesome.
That is awesome. That is.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Christmas. It's Christmas, and we're Pastors Gone Wild again.
Yes. Woo. We didn't do the eggnog though.
I know because we're pastors and we were very tired and bored and full of
I'm doing the coffee at full force, so.
We do both have caffeine though.
Oh, yeah. Right. That is true. No, I like the borrowing the faith of others, because and I think there are times where because I know I do. That's one of those things where it's like, and I think that's probably what Christmas Eve. That's why it speaks to me. Partly because it speaks to me from my experience of old. Because I have an experience of old. That sounds very biblical. It's my experience of old. Thank you. And today we're going to read from name it. So,
well, I was going to say that the borrowing of faith of others probably is in the baptism section of the Book of Confessions, and you have a baptism coming up, so maybe I'm just writing your sermon for you, but it's why Lutherans believe that infants can be baptized, because infants aren't able to say, I love Jesus, because they're babies, and they don't know what that means, and you're supposed to agree to the Apostles' Creed and renounce the devil and spit on him. That was the old-timey way that Martin Luther did it. It's west, by the way. The devil is to the west, and you spit. But that might be anti-Islamic, so maybe don't. So that was a weird tangent. But anyway, this borrowing of the faith is something that happens when godparents stand next to the baby. The idea is that the baby borrows the heart of the godparents who make the baptismal promises for the baby. And so the baby, it's in part future promises saying we're going to teach this baby these things, but it's also under this idea that you can borrow the heart and be a part of this faith and make these promises for each other. That it's not so important that you believe everything in your baptism is what I learned from this, and it's given me liberty to baptize people even if they weren't sure what their connection with God was, but they knew for sure they wanted to be a part of the baptismal rite, and they wanted to be connected to a community of faith, or to, like, I've known people who have said, my grandmother hasn't spoken to me in 30 years because my mom never got me baptized, and if I was baptized, I could be in relationship with my grandma. I'm not sure what I think about the church, but if Christianity is what you talk about as a Lutheran, then I like that, and I'm connected to you, and I follow what you're up to on Facebook and live streams. Can I be baptized even if I'm not sure I believe every single word of the Apostles' Creed? And I talked to them. I said, well, we baptize babies, and they're not sure what they believe yet. And the way they do it is by borrowing the heart of someone. And I said, what if the heart you're borrowing is your grandmother's? Your grandmother who for 30 years has felt like it was so important for you to be connected to God and to faith that they felt like they couldn't be in relationship with you, but I bet they've been praying for you and longing for this, and she knew the moment she was baptized that she would get to be back in relationship with her grandmother. And I'm not saying every baptism is like this or every baptism should be like this, but she was borrowing the faith that her grandmother had in Jesus, and she was staying connected to a pastor, and so we baptized her with a glass of ice water. I apologized for the ice because that wasn't nice, in a bar. And that was a door opening for her to learn more about faith and to learn more about religion, because when her only experience was do this or I'll be estranged from you, it's not always the best evangelism tactic. Do this or you can never be in relationship with me again. I
gotta be at least clarify that, I mean, when it comes to Lutheran baptism, it's like, while we're borrowing our faith, that's not what makes it us able to baptize.
Right.
I mean, that's the secondary. The first is that, and this is tying it back to the very beginning of what I see happening in the manger, is that this is God saying yes to us. And
absolutely.
So in that baptism, it's like God saying yes to us from the very beginning. Now, pastorally, that borrowing the faith, and yes, yeah,
and it ties into for Mark, my favorite of the Gospels.
Yeah. The
Christmas birth story of Jesus is his baptism, because that's when he becomes in full relationship with God through this ritual that the Christians think is the end-all be-all, connect you to God ritual. It was in part really genius because it was invisible and you couldn't kill someone because they were baptized, because you couldn't really see it after the water dried. So it had some tangible reasons. It also connected to water rituals that were a part of Jewish ceremonies. But wherever you find Christmas, wherever you find God born in the world, I think our point is that that's pretty good. We like it.
And I just have to, since we're talking about baptism, and Amanda's not here.
I know!
Baptism! Okay, yeah, there it is. Baptism! And
Amanda would probably remind us that you can learn this love later in life. You don't have to have had it from your whole life. Blah, blah, blah. She converted when she was in her 20s or something like that.
So, and well, it's one of those things too that where so in East Asian Buddhism, there's a fellow by the name of Chenul that talks about that most Buddhism is this idea of gradual awakening and then sudden enlightenment. He reversed it in the sense that talked about that there's sudden enlightenment and gradual awakening. And so in seminary, I wrote a paper which makes me an expert. Anyway, but tying it into that, that's how I view baptism in the sense that we're baptized and then we spend the rest of our lives learning, figuring, and living into that baptism. As Luther would say, clothing ourselves in baptism daily. I like it. And being in Oregon, especially today, you walk out and the rain is just coming down. It's like the Violent Femmes. I hear the rain, I hear the rain. Yeah.
This is the best. This is the best Bible study ever. Until now. When we talk about the holy innocents, you can tell we've been avoiding this topic by doing every silly thing we can manage to not talk about it. But I'll just say really quickly, the history of the Christian church, they lived in a time when people were getting killed for their faith, all the way up till the time when Constantine came around and said, let's stop killing them for a while. And so there was like 300 years of people dying in really horrible, bloody, gruesome, stupid ways. And Christians had to make sense of this. What does it mean if you believe in this faith, you're going to die in a horrible, stupid, bloody way? And why would you believe that faith and be a part of that? This is a longer conversation because Jewish people have been dealing with this same problem of cultural erasing for much, much longer than that, and so they had kind of a starting point for the conversation. But early Christians believed that there were 3 ways to be the holiest. There were 3 ways to die for God that were awesome, according to the most ancient people who came up with awesome ways to die for God. Because being a martyr and being killed was the highest exemplar of all that you could be in Christianity. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because all of these things that Christians believed are all the things that you'll hear with people who are Islamophobic about why people who are Islamic are barbarians, right? So just know that being upset about these kinds of beliefs is something that happens when you are against a group of people because of their cultures and rituals, and might or might not be a part of what you believe too. So Christians who are against people who are of the Islamic faith because of their belief in what happens for martyrs and how they are rewarded in heaven, or because of the treatment of women that are in some conservative sects, you have to remember all those things are exactly true about Christianity and about Judaism and about most conservative sects of faiths all over the world. That shouldn't speak for all faiths around the world, because I think God is more gracious than our histories have been. But there is this tradition that there's 3 ways to die. One, you can die like you can die with your sword out running into battle, right? So you can march into this horrible thing that's going to kill you, and you're a fantastically amazing martyr because you knew it was coming and you ran into it. Stupid, right? Everything your mom would say is stupid was the best, awesomest way to be a martyr. The second way to be a martyr was to be killed because of your faith, maybe indirectly, maybe because you were well known, but you're not like seeking it out. It just kind of happens and you end up getting killed. So maybe it's like a big group of people are all killed at the same time, or maybe maybe it's not clear if that's exactly that you didn't like march towards it, but it happened and you were faithful. This could be the category where you could put people who were assassinated, like Oscar Romero, a bishop from South America, Martin Luther King Jr., Dietrich Bonhoeffer, stuff like that. Like, they weren't like at the Alamo with the guns pointed at them and running towards the guns, right? People came and assaulted them in the midst of them being faithful people. The third way to be an awesome dead martyr person, according to Ye Olde Times Bible thumping, pre-300 era people, and much later in history than I would like to admit because it makes us sound not very progressive, is by no fault of your own and not necessarily having committed a great act of faith, but the way that you have died, people have a sentimentality about it. And so like, for example, if you are killed as a baby and you are murdered because of your parents' faith or through, like, babies, as we talked about in our baptism stuff, they're not like, I'm marching towards death because I love Jesus, right? Unless they're on a cartoon. So there is a Sunday where we celebrate the different kinds of murders, and this happens after Easter. It happens after Christmas, and I call it Dead Baby Sunday, which is the wrong thing to say. I don't say that in church.
Right.
I say that when I'm frustrated about the lectionary text. There are some people who don't read the text and don't think about that on the day after Christmas, but if you are someone who has had a loss in your life of a child, skip that Sunday and feel good about it and do self-care if you know for sure your pastor is going to, like, go down that road. Other pastors will ignore it completely or go on vacation and not be in town so that someone else has to do it. And I had to be the person who had to fill in for many years in a row because all the other pastors were out of town and I was doing homeless ministry and I needed people to know who I was and help support the work that I was doing. Thank you, all of you who did that. But it's a rough and tumbly, weird kind of Sunday. So, like, you have this great, hooray, this baby's saving the world. And then a couple days later, you have, like, horrible things happening to other babies. And the story is framed in the Gospel of Matthew's echoing of what happened to Moses in the Passover. It's, like, on the history scale of how likely it was that things happened, given the historical, like, the concrete historical evidence, because remember, everything was written on a type of paper that disintegrates, so we might or might not have any records of it, and the way that would happen after a lot of conquerings is they would burn down all the places where the information was so that you could start new. So a lot of stuff got burned, a lot of stuff disintegrated. So on the scale, like, if this was over here, this was like, we for sure know Jesus lived and all these things happened outside of the stories that we have in Scripture. On the history scale, boop, it's way over here, because there's only one text, only one history text that even mentions Jesus, and it only mentions him as the brother of James. It doesn't talk about anything wonderful that he did. And this was a book that was written by a really smart Jewish guy who, in order to live, became a writer for the conquering army to write the history of the Jews through their perspective to say how great that conquering army was, right? So if you're going from history, very, 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 very little history proof that Jesus existed in the world. And you'll hear about this every Easter and every Christmas because it sells a lot of newspapers to talk about this. We're talking about a faith story. We're talking about a scripture. We're talking about an oral tradition that was passed down. We're talking about real encounters that we have with God, but it's not like from this historical place. So this much amount of history put into talking about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection in the books of politics written at the time. The likelihood that the political leaders of the day knew that this baby was born in a very remote town after a donkey journey ride on a census because people came from China and found him is like over here. On the history scale, it's like no one, do you think there's anyone who believes from a historical perspective that the political leaders were actually historically trying to kill Jesus at the time that he was a baby? I don't think there's anyone who, like, I've never read anything other than people who are saying that from a faith perspective. This is the list of things you need to believe because this story is true, because everything in the Bible is 100% true in every single way. Aside from that argument, when it comes to history,
I always think of what Robert Smith, who's a Matthew scholar from PLTS and Seminex, but what Robert Smith would say, because he got asked to participate in the historical Jesus, the seminar the Jesus seminar and that, and he always declined because he goes that's not the game I play, and I loved how he put it that way because it's like he goes no, that's not the game I play, and he goes we all play a game, and so we all when we read scripture we come to it with our certain set of lenses, and so whether we read it in a historical sense or we're trying to debunk it or we're reading it as a book of faith, and I just loved how because he was very anyway, I just like that image of what we're doing.
So read it as poetry if that works for you. Read it as song if that works for you. Read it as good moral lessons for how to live your life. Read it as a couple of dudes' experience with God and they wrote it down and that gives you permission to have your own experience for God. Read it as a part of this continuum of faith where we borrow the faith from our ancestors. Read it as a really amazing story, like the coolest story ever. But I guess the reason I talk about the historical likelihood of whether or not political leaders were trying to actually kill the baby Jesus is because if you want to have permission not to celebrate Holy Innocents, right, or Dead Baby Sunday, you don't have to celebrate it, right? Just because it's in the lectionary doesn't mean you got to do it. So my invitation to every pastor and every congregant is to say, we don't believe this anymore. We don't believe that babies who are killed are holier than babies who die of Ebola or babies who live to be 85. We, in our Lutheranness, believe everyone's equal. We don't have saints in different hierarchies, and we don't have to have Holy Innocents Sunday anymore. I think it's stupid and harmful. The end.
Interesting though. You say the end. Well, then, okay.
And
anyway,
then what John says.
Right. Anyway, the funny, interesting thing is one of the sermons I remember as a kid was our Pastor Hansen, Pastor Paul Hansen, who's retired now, and
untraceable because that's the most Lutheran name that ever was Lutheran.
Yes, exactly. And he's in Montana, and anyway, so you can find it. But great sermon in the sense he preached on. It was the first time I'd ever heard about this. This text, and first of all, there was a sense of bravery in taking that on, but there's something powerful about lifting up this text. I mean, this horrific text about that. It's like I don't want to preach on it. I like look at this. I was like, I don't want to do this at all. But there's a sense that for those coming across this text and just us ignoring it, they go, wait a minute. This is pretty intense and crappy stuff.
Yeah.
And to springboard from that about lifting that up, you just mentioned about that we see our definition of saint is much broader, and so to use this almost as the springboard into but yeah, I just remember I remember being shocked in the sense of like
yeah.
Well,
I just think sure, talk about it in Bible study, talk about it in books, talk about it online, but in a service that might have kids at it,
So
right?
we're
the sacrifice of Isaac. Do you talk about God wanting, being a part of a story where lots of babies get killed? I don't know.
Right.
I vote no this year.
Right.
That's it. I'm going to China. I'm not going to preach on it.
Well, and partly this does then challenge our notion that we have a God that we can talk about. I don't know. I'm stumbling over the words, but whether we talk we don't have a God that controls every action in the world, and so how does I know
what
I know it's like
and then we ran out of steam.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Larry.
There is a power here, though, on this text about that good news and grace in the midst of absolute chaos can break through. It's this is where we tie it into the John text, that the light shines in the darkness because the darkness cannot overcome it. That, I mean, this is like the one of the darkest texts, and
it's not.
I know
one of the darkest texts is the book of Maccabees. Maccabees is horrible, bad things happen to those Jewish grandmothers. And as my professor from Augustana College used to say, the Reverend Dr. Richard Swanson, he talks about, maybe this is why the text remains in there, is this echoing from the past of the Maccabean grandmothers, who at the time of the evil king Antiochus, whatever Roman numeral it was, 6 or 7 or 3, I don't know. He was bad, and he was the worst ever. The worst imaginable thing you can ever imagine in Scripture. Stop it now if you don't want to hear it. Is this evil king Antiochus didn't want people to be circumcised. He didn't want people to be Jewish, and they had this outward sign of their circumcision that you could check. And so Antiochus said, any mother that gets their baby circumcised, the baby will be killed and hung around the mother's neck, and the mother has to carry the dead fetus until it rots off. That's the worst thing in Scripture, I think.
Yeah.
It takes us farther, right? So this Matthew description is a tamed down, maybe, remembrance of what happened to the Maccabean grandmothers and what happened during Moses' time in those plagues.
Well, and for Matthew, I think it really is tying into the Moses text. I mean, because then when he comes out of Egypt, he can fulfill the prophecy of as one came out of Egypt. So there is. I mean, for Matthew, it's pretty clear that he is same way with the Beatitudes, that he becomes Moses on the mountain, and those things like that. So, but what I think is interesting about it is it's this reference to people who have faith beyond faith. Faith when you shouldn't, when it would be stupid to have faith, right? The Maccabean grandmothers had faith when it was stupid to have faith. And it's encouraging people to have faith in times when other people think it's stupid that we have faith. And in much less dramatic and horrible ways, hopefully. If the worst thing that happens is people go, really? Really? That's what you are? It's bringing back to the Bible. What is faith? Faith is hope for the things that we can't see. I mean, there's that beyond where you look at it and go, you believe this? You have faith in that? It's like, and to be able to have faith, or that we have faith, where someone next door says, you're crazy. I mean, that's ridiculous. Right.
Right.
So.
And I've been kind of thinking about some of these texts, like maybe the Holy Innocents text and this stuff about dead babies bugs us because we don't want to think about the worst things imaginable. Like losing a child is up there on the worst things imaginable to live through. I know that. And also, there are many places in this world still, like for example, on our trip that Laurel and I are taking, we have a 24-hour layover in Saudi Arabia, where we are not able to leave the airport, first of all, because you need to have a male escort to leave the airport. Second of all, because being gay is punishable by death. So we can't rent a hotel room, and even though we're legally married, and on our passport, now that it says we're legally married, yay for that, we can't pretend we're cousins or sisters. So if we leave the airport, we are not safe. And that's different than being killed for your faith, but there are people who are killed for who they are and how they are all over the place. We're going to make a stop in Jerusalem, where they're still shooting bombs at each other all the time, little missiles, and fighting over where God's house should be and how people should get to have their houses and where. And so I think there's a lot of very real volatility, and our own inclination to avoid this text in Scripture is the same inclination that we have to avoid knowing that these things are happening when it's on the news, and to avoid doing something about it when our politicians maybe are interested in doing something about it. And so you're probably right that it's good to read this text because it wakes you up and it reminds us of things that are happening in the world. And the Sunday after Christmas is typically a low Sunday when no one comes anyway, so you get to be preachier and shake things awake, but
and maybe
still dumb.
maybe the sense of a way to approach this text, I mean, in preaching, but also in Bible study, but it's just to look at it and go, this disturbs me, and to be honest from the pulpit and say, this, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
And I know that when you talked about that, we have folks in our congregation that have lost. I mean, and it speaks to all loss. I mean, whether it be the loss of a baby, a loss of a parent, a loss of in divorce. I mean, all kinds of loss.
Right.
And where it's like that, yet God can still not. I want to be careful because it's not that God uses this to speak through it, but that in spite of this, God still speaks. Yeah, I mean, that's a difference between going, God caused this so God's glory could be out there. No.
Yeah.
It's that in spite of the darkness, back to John, the light still shines.
Well, and this ties me back to what I was saying when John the person who is in the box right here, when John was away and I was trying to remember what the heck we were talking about after our both needing to be the church secretaries for a second, I was talking about how I think Mary, and I'm trying to get us somewhere happier before we end this.
Good.
But I was talking about how Mary, in her way that she spins what is happening to her, tells God, you're going to make this justice happen. I'm having this baby, but you're going to do all this justice in the world. And I was talking about it like Mary creating God's New Year's resolution. Yeah. Instead of Mary making her own list of things to do, she makes New Year's resolutions for God that she wants to hold God accountable for. And so maybe this is our Sunday to get to think of the crap things that happen in the world so we can get God on it and pray for it for a year as a church and think about the ways that we can be that justice alive in the world. It's weird because you want to dwell in the happy twinkly feelings, right? It's right. Like we want to be the place where we're holding on to that twinkly hope and love of Christmas so long that people are like, you really should take your lights down, right? Because we're holding on to the hope because we're excited about it, and that's not what the biblical texts get us. Thump the Bible one more time, quick.
Well, oh yeah. Oh, this is my happy ending.
Okay, good.
So I have this on my desk every and this ties back into faith, ties back into all the things. But so I have this little gift box on my desk. I've had it now. Peter is in 6th grade. He made this in kindergarten. And maybe kindergarten. So he was at Laurelhurst kindergarten, elementary school, and they made this, and they're love boxes. And so you got little hearts on it. Now they're all cute and all that. And inside is his love. If you open it up, anyone else looking in here wouldn't be able to see anything. But I know that inside here is Peter's love.
That's adorable.
I loved it. That's because he told me they made it in kindergarten. He said, and he goes, and I put my love inside the box, so it sits on my desk. And and so I have that there, to especially as Peter becomes a teenager, being reminded that we have love. But bringing it back to that faith, that hope, and love, and all that. That there's the times where even as I struggle to see it, I read about it in the Bible. So there.
That's right, people. Yeah, I like that. All right. Well, anyone who's stuck with us, you deserve special points in heaven, particularly because for Lutherans, points don't matter, so I can give them out as freely as I would like to. We think everybody gets to go, and God's in charge of that, not us.
But whose line is it anyway?
Have a Merry Christmas that is safe, sane, and consensual in all of the ways that you are partaking in your Christmas awesomeness. Know that your pastor needs a nap That would be my advice. If they're crabbier than normal or sick, give them a break. Enjoy the twinkly lights, and give them gift cards for stuff. Pastors like gift cards. That's all I have.
All right. So.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you next time. Perhaps either next week, either Pastor Amanda will be leading the Bible study that doesn't suck, or maybe I'll figure out what time zone I'm in. I think it's maybe 12 hours difference. I don't know where I'll be that day. But maybe for Bible study, I'll come to you live from somewhere cool. I might be in the Holy Land. That would be pretty fun.
That would be.
If I was there. Where am I? What's it say? I'm in India. So maybe Bible study will not suck from India for me next time, but we'll find out.
New Year's Eve.
That's right.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, goodbye, everyone.
All right. Merry Christmas.